Hey guys, and I was thinking that because we've just completed our storyboard video, I might as well go ahead and start documenting the animation that I'll be making. And hopefully by doing this, it'll maybe help you guys come up with different ideas or just see anything that I'm doing that you're not familiar with and you would be able to ask a question and figure out how to do it. But if this is helpful, hopefully some good stuff will fall out of it. All right. Well, at this point, I would say that if I were to be planning on making an animation, I would have done all my kind of planning phases, which is the storyboard, the animatic, and generating my list of things that I need to do. And if I'm really excited about getting going, sometimes I'll just start working through the scenes as individual Maya files. So, in looking at my storyboard, I can kind of group these first two panels together as a single frame. And usually I'll do scenes by maybe camera cuts is a good rule of thumb. So because this is all kind of one solid camera shot and then it cuts over to this, I can think of this as its own scene. So if I wanted to get going on that in Maya, I would go ahead and make a new scene. And before I would have made a new scene, I would have also said set project and then found my project folder. This is my Kirby car animation, so I'll go ahead and set. And the very first thing that I do is actually say save scene as, and then whatever this scene is going to be called. You can see here I already have a scene 1, so I'll go ahead and actually name it scene 1 example, just so I'm not saving over my other work. Great. And so based on my storyboard, I know that I need my car rig. I know I'll need some kind of background and then maybe some kind of thing that's indicating that they're kind of going fast and zipping down the road. So maybe some boxes or something like that. All right. Go ahead and open up my reference editor under File, Reference Editor. This will bring up this window. I'll hit the little plus sign and then reference in my toy car. Say OK. And because it's a new scene in my viewport, I don't have textures turned on. So if I click the little checker pattern, it'll bring in all the textures, and then my car looks how it should. OK. The next thing that I'll want to do is based on my storyboard, I know kind of the camera angle that I'm going to do. So I'll go ahead and make a new camera and put it in place and lock it so that, because this one's going to be a static camera shot, I won't have to animate it. So I'll click Panels, Perspective, New, and then turn on up here. This, if you click this little button, it has a white outline and then a blue center. That is showing you what the camera will render. So I like to use this for framing. So this is a 16 by 9 resolution. So I'll go ahead and put this in place. I kind of want it maybe looking up at them a little bit so that the ground plane isn't really in view. And maybe their back of the car is off the screen a little bit. And then if you tap spacebar, you can actually set each of these panels to whatever cameras you want. So I'll often use this top left one as my shot camera and make sure to turn textures on. And then this camera I'll use and switch it back to just perspective, which is the default Maya perspective camera, so I can zip around and it won't mess up my shot. In the outliner, I'll go ahead and name my new camera Shot Cam, so it's clear what it's being used for. I'm pretty happy with this angle. So then with the shot cam selected, I'll highlight all the translates and all the rotates and say lock selected. So I can't accidentally move my camera now if I'm panning around accidentally in this view. Okay, so then I would need some kind of a background that's going to be going by kind of slowly in the background. This shot I'm thinking is going to use something called parallax, which is a phenomenon where if you're looking at something in perspective, the things in the close ground are moving fast and the things in the background are moving slow. So you can see that with, maybe I'll try and find a quick example here. Videos, parallax effect. So yeah, you could watch a video on it if you wanted, but basically this guy is just setting it up so that he's got these things in the foreground, and as they animate, they're going quicker, and then the things in the background are going slower. So in my animation, I want my little background plane to move slowly, and then maybe have a bunch of objects in the foreground going quickly. So I'll just make a quick cube. Maybe it's he's driving by a bunch of little blocks or something like that. Yeah, I'll probably end up making some wood blocks. Maybe it's like the toy version of a road guard thing. So got my box over here. We'll make a few of them. Just line them up like that. And then I'll select all my cubes and hit Control G, and that'll put them in a group. So now I can just click the top group and it'll move all of them all at once. And if I go back to my shot view, you can see I can scroll this by, and it looks like he's kind of zipping on by. All right, and then I'll also go ahead and set up my background plane by making a new plane, selecting the options, making sure that it's just one subdivision by one subdivision. Go ahead and make it really big. Rotate it 90 degrees so it's facing the camera. Pick it up a little bit. All right, so now I can pan this left to right kind of slowly, and it's still covering up. You can see in my shot it's going to be covering up the whole view, so that should work pretty good. So I'll move it kind of as far left as I can so that I can animate it over time. So if I wanted to add a custom texture to this, maybe some clouds, the way to do that is you just go ahead and select your plane so that it's kind of ready for animation. I usually like to delete history by clicking this button here, or saying edit, delete by type, history. And then the other thing that I do is freeze transformations. So what that means is that over here you have your translates, rotates, and scales, and they're all like populated with lots of numbers. But for this shot, I want this to be its like initial state. So this is kind of zeroed out is often what I'll call it. So to get to that, you basically just click this little snowflake, which is freeze transformations, or you can go into modify and then say freeze transformations like that. If things aren't zeroing out the whole way, it's possible that here in your freeze transformations options, some of these are unchecked. So if I didn't have the translate checked, then it wouldn't have zeroed out my translates. So if it doesn't do that when you do freeze transformation, that's probably why. Okay, now that I have my plane zeroed out, I'll call it maybe sky, and add a new material to it so that I can add a custom texture. Planes are really nice and easy for putting textures on, because by default I'll just click my UV window here. You can see in my UV editor, a plane makes a perfect 1 by 1 UV. So if you think of the image you bring in, if it's a perfect square, then it will sit on this plane and it'll look exactly how it looks in Photoshop or whatever image editing program you're using. So adding a new material happens by selecting an object, or this is one way you can do it. Right click on that object and say assign new material. It brings up this window, and I'm going to be using a very simple material, which is a Lambert, just because all I need is some color. So if I click Lambert, you can see over here that I switched over to my attribute editor, and these are all the nodes that are associated with this object currently. And at the end, Lambert 2 is what has been added. By default, when Maya makes a new Lambert, it gives it just, whatever the name of the material is, which is Lambert, and then a number, which is how many current Lamberts there are. So this is the second Lambert that's been made, so it's called Lambert 2. But I want to be able to find my texture in the future if I need to. So I'm going to call it Sky Matte or Sky Material, right? So when I hit enter, you can see that it updates. So now it has a custom name. So when I select my plane, you can see that Sky Matte is on that plane. So if I want to put in an image in this material, what I would need to do is go ahead and add a file node for the color channel. So here in the color channel, if I click the little checker pattern, it brings up this box, and you can say what kind of thing you want to be in the color channel. I want a file to be in there because I'm going to go find a picture of clouds. So if I click File, now it's kind of gray, but that's because there's nothing currently in my file node. So I can either make one in Photoshop, but just for time's sake, I'll go ahead and just do a quick Google search for cloud image. Go here. Sure, let's use this guy. Yeah, I'll use this. No, there we go. Yeah, so that's, whatever. I'll use this one. It doesn't really fit with the toy theme, but for speed's sake, I'll use this. So I'll say copy image. And I've gotten into this habit where you can just right click on a image when you've done a Google search and say copy image, and then it puts it just kind of in your clipboard memory. So if you have Photoshop open, a cool thing that Photoshop does is when you make a new document, if you have something saved, it knows what is currently in your clipboard, and it can basically make a canvas the exact size that it needs to be. And so here you can see the top left item is called clipboard, and so the size is 1920 by 1268. And if I go back to my online thing, you can see that this image is, when I've clicked on it or hovered over it, it's 12 or whatever it was. That's the exact pixel dimensions. So when I make my thing and I just hit Control V, it just pastes it right in place, and it's exactly the right size. And so like I said, the UVs are always a square. They're 1 by 1. So I'm just bringing it into Photoshop so that I can make a perfect square, crop that image, and then just save this in my source images folder for my project. So if I say export, quick export ping under File, quick export ping, I can go to my project folder, which is under class resources, animation, path animation, curry, and then here under source images, you can see that I currently have my couple different people, my wallpaper, some wheels. So I'll call this sky underscore diffuse. It's just a naming convention. Anyway, so I'll say OK. Now, if I go back into Maya and this empty file node, when I click the file button, it automatically looks in my source images folder, and my sky is here. So if I hit open, you can see that my sky is now on the image plane. It's rotated wrong. So I'll go ahead, select my plane, and if you hold J when you're rotating, it should snap, and that way you can get an exact 90 degrees, which is nice. Now when I've rotated it, once again, I want it to be at 0, 0. So I'll hit the freeze transformations button. You can see that now my rotates are set back to 0, so that's good. Okay, the next thing that I'd want to do is maybe add in my slow motion or slow kind of panning for the sky as it kind of goes across for the number of frames that I have. In my animatic, you can see that I spent a little time kind of trying to figure out how long I wanted to focus on this shot. And I think I landed around 4 seconds for the entire shot duration. So 4 seconds seemed like a decent amount of time for like kind of easing you into what's going on. Sometimes the first shot can be really fast in animation, and I find that to be a little jarring because people don't really know what's going on yet. So I'll take 4 seconds to get things going. So that's 24 frames is 1 second, 48 2, 72 is 3, and then 96 is 4 seconds. So if I want it to pan from here to here over the 4 seconds, I will go ahead and move my timeline here to frame 1. Go to the Z channel, key selected, go to frame 96, and kind of move it over maybe just a little bit. So one thing that I'll mention that might encourage you guys to use the workflow where you're keying one thing at a time is to go ahead and just turn on auto key. So you can see that there's no keyframe here right now. I just undid what I did. All I did is at the beginning, I locked in a keyframe, and then I came to frame 96, and because auto key is turned on, I've gone over in the Z channel. It automatically put that in there, so I didn't have to go back and right click and say key again. It just saves you a little time and it makes it a little easier. One thing to keep in mind though is, so if I had on this frame, I wanted it to be down here, because I hadn't put a keyframe here in the Y channel yet. If I go back to frame 1, you can see that it's not going to be back to 0 because I don't have any keyframes on that yet. So it only puts automatically puts a key in to something that already has keyframes on it. Hope that makes sense. All right, so I'll go ahead and highlight the whole timeline because I want it to pan across in an even fashion. And by clicking on the timeline, so if you hold Shift, click on the timeline, and then drag over, that's how I'm highlighting all of those. If I right-click inside of the red area and then go to tangents, this is just a quick way to flatten things out or change the shape as like, you know, a blanket, like doing it all at once. So here, by default, things are set to auto. I want it to be linear. And so what that looks like is that it just evenly goes across. There's no easing. And just so that you have another reference point, you can see that this is a linear tangent. So it translates in this flat fashion. Okay, so now if I hit my play button, I have my playback settings set so that only one window, update the view only in the active window, is turned on. It just makes my computer run a little faster, especially when I'm recording videos. So if I want to see it animate in my shot cam, I need to click here, and you can see that there's like a little white outline on whatever your active window is. And right now this is on the shot cam. So if I hit play, you can see it kind of going by a little kind of slowly. And that's looking reasonable. I guess I also have one of the features of this rig turned on right now, which is auto spinning wheels. So this by default I think is turned on in the source file. So if you turn it off, you can see that now the timeline's going. Oops, sorry. I'll click back on my shot cam so that you can see what's going on. Pans back and forth. The wheels are no longer spinning. If I select that, turn it back on, now it's going to spin at a speed of 10, whatever that means. So it's going that fast. I want it to be going a little faster, as though he's kind of like cruising down the highway. Maybe dial it up to 20. Yeah, that's pretty good. Maybe even a little faster, 25, so that it starts to look like they're spinning backwards. That's kind of a thing that happens with rotation. It goes forward for a certain amount of speed, but then once you achieve a certain amount of speed, it almost looks like they're rotating backwards, which is an interesting phenomenon. Okay, that is looking close to what I would like. The next thing that I'll do is go ahead and put some animation here on my little foreground objects where they're going quickly. And I'm going to use the BH Ghost script to line things up and help them repeat. So once again, I'll be animating on the Z channel. So here, now that I'm on frame 1, if I right click and say key selected, I'll say maybe I'll do half a second and I'll move it maybe a few blocks. But you can see it's kind of hard to line it up because what I'm going to want to do is basically just have it snap back and forth over and over. What I mean by that is that with my group selected, I'll activate my ghost script and switch it over to white. Hit ghost. Okay, cool. Actually, I'll bust all the one that I want to save is frame 1, so I'll ghost that. And then if I go forward to frame 12, I want it to be exactly lined up, or I want some of the boxes to be exactly lined up. So we'll scoot it forward just a little bit, and that looks pretty good. Once again, I want this movement to be linear, so I'll hold shift, click on the timeline, highlight that, right click, tangents, and linear. And so now it goes from here to here in a linear fashion. So my trick is to basically get it to cycle over and over. Sometimes I'll do this where you go, this matches up basically. So I'll go one frame before and I'll right click on Translate Z, say key selected. And now because this and this are effectively looking they look like the same frame, I can right click on the timeline, copy that keyframe, select frame 12, right click and paste that keyframe so it snaps back, right? And make sure to highlight all of your keyframes once again and do linear. Now, if I look in my shot cam, it looks like, well, I haven't done a cycle yet. Sorry about that. So if I right click, or not right click, if I hold shift, click on frame 1, go over, right click and say copy, you can start to paste keyframes along the timeline and create a little bit of a loop. So I want this frame to now be here. So I'll go paste, click here again, paste, click here again, paste. So now you can see that it looks like it's just zipping by over and over and over. And that's, if I go back to here, you can see actually what's happening is it's like snapping it back to exactly the right position each time. So it's a way of creating an artificial loop. To get everything filled out a little faster, you can copy like the full thing now. Say copy, and then go to paste. I'm missing, I need one more. Copy, paste. Cool. So now, this looks like he's just kind of cruising down the road. Go back to here. Get rid of my ghosts. All right, so he's kind of cruising down the road here, and so at this point, the ideas that I've covered is translating my storyboard shot into Maya by laying the objects out in space, then adding in some of the motion that I just had in my head as what would be happening, where the sky is panning slowly and the objects in the foreground are speeding by a little bit faster, and adding in some of the motion to the car is actually going to be my final touch. So right now it's very static, and that's kind of unnatural. So I kind of want it to slowly be drifting a little bit, or just some real subtle motion. So I'm going to add a little bit of a forward back in the Z motion, and maybe just a few little bumps in the Y motion. And hopefully that'll kind of give the feeling that he's actually driving down the road. So if I right click on the Z channel and keyframe 1, and then I go to the end, and then I key here, if I'm in the middle and I move it forward just a little bit, I think that'll start to get the motion that I'm thinking. Yeah, so he's kind of like going a little faster in that shot, or the camera is moving a little bit, or whatever. So that just kind of gives it that little bit of feeling like he's actually going along the road. Then, if I want to do some bumps, I can do a similar treatment that I was doing for my background image, where I kind of make one bump and then I can kind of copy it maybe in a few places. So on frame 1, if I right click on my Y channel, select the first keyframe, maybe go to frame 4, just up a little bit, maybe 0.02. Go forward a few frames, do a negative 0.01, and then maybe a 0.01, and then a 0. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, so it kind of looks like you went over something there. Bloop, bloop. Cool. So in my, because I want to make sure to only copy the Y channel, I'm actually going to use my graph editor to do the pasting here. So if I have my move control selected, select my Y channel, zoom out, I can copy those and just kind of paste them where I want by highlighting that, hitting Control C, and then wherever my time slider is actually where it's going to drop in pasted frames. So we'll drop some in here. Maybe go forward right after it, drop one in, and then wait a little bit, drop one in, like that. Yeah. See what that looks like. Yeah, so he's kind of just bumping down the road a little bit. Okay, well, I hope this has been helpful. This is kind of a very quick but simple way of laying out my first shot, which doesn't have a lot of animation in it, but it has some tricks that make it feel like, you know, he's moving really fast and he's like actually covering a lot of ground. But instead of actually moving, I'm just kind of using some animation on some other elements. And I may, some of you might be shaking your head at me right now because some of my comments on the feedback of the ball animation is that you don't really want to do keyframe animation on polygons. And what I've done right here is put a bunch of animation on this polygon and I put a bunch of animation on this group. So I will kind of make a caveat to my statement, which is when you're animating a rigged object, you don't want to put any keyframes on the polygons in general. You only want to put animation on the controls. So with the car, you can see that I was actually animating on the controls. But these new little environmental objects that I've dropped in, because their motion is so simple, it's just left to right, and same for these objects here. I'm going ahead and just, you know, not setting up a rig for them. I'm just animating directly on the objects themselves, which is totally fine. And you know, hopefully you won't get too upset with me for maybe telling you something and then telling you something exactly the opposite in the next breath. Okay, well, if there are any questions that fall out of this little video, let me know and bring them to class or send me an email. Okay, thank you.